When I read this reading a couple of days ago and knew I was going to speak about it, I was immediately thrown back into my first experience of Ananda, because that quality of self-effort and the energy that goes in to what that means was the first thing that I noticed. And this is many years ago, up at Ananda Village. And I was a single mother. I had 2 children. I was, believe me, used to putting out energy. But I was impressed by what I saw. People were busy, but they were busy about things that meant something. There was a heartfelt quality that went into that busyness. And last night, as I was ready to go to sleep, I started to tick off the number of things that first I had done in my few years there, and then the number of things that Ananda was doing at that time. And we're talking almost 40 years ago. And for myself, I started out working in guest programs. Guest programs in those days was a trailer up by the expanding light. And I had a little desk in the back of the trailer, and I would answer the phone as if I was in a 7-story building. Good afternoon, this is Ananda meditation retreat, or whatever it was, and being very professional. And the guests would come, and we would do whatever they do at the guest retreat. And then I needed a little more money than the retreat was able to give me. And so I moved into what was, at that time, the public relations business that was run by an individual at the community. And I found myself on the phone with all these dignitaries from back east and in the west and all around, setting up appointments for them with newspaper reporters and interviews on TV and articles in the paper and so forth. It was like unbelievable to me that I was doing that. And I'm thinking, this is the spiritual path. And then after a couple of years doing that, he closed up shop, and I ended up doing it on my own. And my one client was Bob Hope's comedy writer. And he was just the nicest guy. And he was relying on me to get him gigs. And so I would do that. And then eventually I ended up at the publications building. And, Ananda was putting out books. Swami was writing books like crazy. How many books has he written? I've read almost all of them, but I must confess there are a couple. And I was in the part that was working for Bharat, Joseph Cornell, who was the author of Sharing Nature with Children. And at the time, he was working on his second book, which was Listening to Nature. And so I was doing all the typing and all of that. Believe me, that was no small thing, because we're talking early 80s, and we didn't have computers. And I was on a typewriter. So then computers came in, but in my mind, I was still on a typewriter. And that was so difficult for me, the transition into just the earliest renditions. But at any rate, I was there and working in this little tiny office in what was known as the Publications Building now. Now it's what is it? Hansa Temple, which is a nice transition. And then after that, at Ananda, you moved around. It wasn't like anybody cared that I was a college teacher and that I was a professor and that my gig was teaching English literature and grammar and writing. No, I don't know who ever even knew that at the time, and I didn't volunteer it. It seemed non-important. And so I finally ended up at Mountain Song. Mountain Song was the clothing retail store in Nevada City. And believe me, never in my wildest dreams had I thought that I would be encouraging women to buy dresses. But I did. And it was interesting. Now, some of these things were actually a tapasya for me. I wasn't a natural at it. I wasn't speaking to my strengths, but I was speaking to the basic quality that was pulsating at Ananda in those days, and that was energy. It didn't matter who you were. If something was needed, you just did it. And you did it with full energy, and by that I mean with joy. Always feeding into that output of doing was that basic relationship with God that expressed in prayer, in meditation, in satsang. There wasn't a day that went by when I was working for an Ananda business that everybody didn't put down everything they were doing, no matter what, and we meditated. It could have been 15 minutes, it could have been half an hour. But not only did we bookend the day with meditation, but we infused it in what we were doing. Energetically, it changed, I believe, the molecules in the air. And when I think back on it, I just shared with you my experience of what work meant at Ananda. But Ananda, the output at that time in the village was incredibly diverse. I mean, I actually made a list last night of all the businesses, and it's pretty impressive. So we can start with the organic garden, which was fueled by the efforts of Ananda, Gary's brother, and Maria. And lots of people started out there. I would have loved to have worked in the garden. Did I get a chance to do that? No. God has other plans for us. We don't get to write the lesson plan. He has. From our input of past lives, of course. We have to take responsibility. But they also had a medical center with Dr. Peter just up the road that served not only Ananda, but all the outlying people up there in the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. There was a builders guild that was extremely busy. And eventually, well, that's another story. There was a Clarity magazine, which I absolutely loved. I was so sorry when that stopped happening. But it was just a little magazine, a paper, in your hand. and it had stories. So the power of story when you're talking about something as transcendental as a spiritual community is impossible to measure. So we need to tell our stories. There was the market. That was the hub of the village. You got to see people. No matter if I was at the back of the trailer up at the Expanding Light, still, we all went down to the market for lunch. And so there was this phenomenal esprit de corps that kind of fueled the Ananda community. We would hail each other and we would do our shopping there. Now, it was a little country market, so sometimes you went into town, but for the most part, it was a hub. And you could go there and get a morning coffee if you weren't working like I was, and, just talk to people. And there was Friday night pizza, which was at the market, and all the kids from the high school and the lower school came by, and their parents came by. And so there was this true sense of community. And then we had all the little businesses that people thought up, and then they just did. There was a jewelry shop, and there were goats. The goats were a business. You had to get up early in the morning and go milk the goats, or they'd let you know about it. And then, we had the goat milk in the market, and it was wonderful, along with all those organic vegetables. So I could probably go on and on. Some of you will remind me later about the tremendous innovative energy that fueled that community, and when it overpoured into this community, it fueled this community. So we here at Ananda Palo Alto have our own story to tell about how we use our energy. And if you just think about it for a moment, what's happening here? So much. People are running to get it done. I mean, the number of programs that come out of the Sangha are incredible. They're amazing. And people teach those programs. They prepare for those programs. They take care of the people who come and who are wanting to receive everything that is being given. And so that's the Sangha, and of course the services and the initiations and all of that, in addition to those classes. But then there's the yoga center, and that's a whole work in itself. And you're probably, some of you, going to have to add on to this, because I'm in a different area. I'm at the school. We have a Living Wisdom school here, and it goes from TK up now through high school. And it's just, burgeoning with energy, just waiting to be appreciated by more and more people. It is an amazing enterprise in Master's name. We just had a conference, because I'm part of the school. I'll say a few more words about it, but we had a conference that was worldwide. So here we are at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there are people in Slovakia and Italy and who knows where at 11 o'clock, India, at 11 o'clock at night, or was it 11? Yeah. And, we're both bleary-eyed, but for different reasons. But it was wonderful, because Gary and I were sharing about what we do here in Palo Alto with these children, with teachers who are in every stage of a development of a school, which, by the way, is no small thing. And they're listening and also reciprocating with their stories, amazing stories, what they're doing. They have to work with things we don't have to do. In Slovakia or Slovenia, they have to get approval from the government. Yeah, God spared me that. And then, of course, we have at East West, the store, which is a magnet for the whole area and just requires tons of energy from the Gamaos, of course, but from all the people who work there. And what have I missed? Well, you can fill that out. All I know is that we have, the community. I'm looking at David James. The community, think about that. Putting together in this day and age of division, of materialism, of godlessness, putting together a spiritual community in the midst of Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, which is just an energy, puts out a lot of energy, but certainly not for spirituality that much. And we're a light shining in the darkness. And people, when they hear about what we're doing, and what we're offering, what's possible, they're amazed. I frankly am amazed. I'm more than amazed. I'm humbled by the fact that I get to be part of it. So that's the energy part. But our reading today goes way beyond energy. You just can't have energy. You have to have that overlay of devotion. Because without devotion, energy doesn't mean a thing. And it has to be mindful devotion. And that, of course, is what we're all about, bringing those two things together. Swami Kriyananda was the perfect example of that. He was amazing in his ability to put out energy, to be a magnet for Master, for this spiritual path, to write those books, all of those things that we know. But being in his presence, or listening to his talks, or reading his books, wherever we are in that list, his energy comes through, but it comes through as devotion. And when one could be in his presence, that was amazing. And if you weren't here when he was in the body, then you get this next best thing, which is all of the output of recordings, of videos, of books. He just made sure to leave a legacy that will last for generations and generations. So the heart has to get involved with the energy, and he did that for us. He gave us a model. I'm really thinking in my own experience of two people, Joseph of Cupertino and Vaishnavi. And these are two people in my life. Now, Joseph of Cupertino is a saint who grew up in Italy, and he was a mystic. And people don't know what to do with mystics. they're just who they are. And they're so weird that they oftentimes get put away in a closet. And that's what happened to Joseph of Cupertino. He was Italian, of course, and his superiors just, what were they going to do with this guy? He kept levitating. He kept kind of moving up, 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 and then the next thing they know, he was in the air, and the molecules in the air had changed, and their minds could not take that in. So they came upon a solution. And they took Joseph of Cupertino, and they said, these are your quarters. They called them quarters. It was really a prison. I remember visiting Assisi one time, and we went to the basilica, and we actually got to see his quarters, to be in there, where he had walked. Now, the reason I bring up Joseph, there are many saints I could talk about, but the reason I bring him up is that in his quarters, I noticed over in a little corner was a glass case, like how they put out jewelry so you can see it and buy one. But that's not what was in the case. In the case was a little doll of Jesus, and it was all ornately dressed, and it was Joseph's doll. And Joseph, in his ecstatic relationship with the divine, felt the need, I don't know if it was a need, but the inspiration to root that in physicality through this doll. And he would hold that doll, and he would love that doll and care for it. I mean, the maternal quality of love has no substitute. It's just pure. And you don't have to be a woman to experience it. He's proved that. And I noticed that my friend Vaishnavi, who just left her body, she used to, when I would visit her, when she would come over here, she always had a doll of her guru. And it was Amma, the hugging saint. And she carried that doll with her everywhere. It was in the suitcase or wherever we might have been over the many years that we knew each other. And her whole spiritual path was a combination of intellectuality. Yes, she was very bright. She was a wonderful teacher. But what made her so wonderful was the wedding of the intellectuality with the heart. Vaishnavi could walk into a classroom, and Mahita, who used to teach kindergarten for us, said, she walked into my classroom, she sat down, she said, "Come here, children," and all the children came here. This is kindergarten and TK. And they sat down, and they looked at her, and they listened to her, and they just absorbed all that love that she had to give without her talking about it or enticing them or anything. It was a magnetism that she had because of her nurturing of her own loving heart. So there were those two. And then I thought to myself, I was thinking the wedding of energy and heart quality. I was thinking about myself. How did I come to that? Or did I? Do I have a marriage of those two things in my psyche, in my life, in my soul depth? And that brought me back to when I was 7 years old. And when you're 7 years old in a Catholic family, you get to make your first Holy Communion. This is a very special time. It's when you are allowed to receive the host, the body of Christ, and to actually take it in physically. That's the wedding of the physical with that which is totally spiritual. This is a serious occasion, and we took it seriously, especially the nun who was teaching us about Holy Communion. She was wonderful. I loved her. Her name was Sister Jude, and she was trying to help us not only understand the theology or the mysticism. I mean, you're 7 years old. What is you going to do with that? So she made it real. And she said to us, you have to visualize Jesus as being in your heart. And I thought about that, and I didn't like the preposition. In my heart? Come on. That doesn't work for me. On my heart? Yeah. And I developed this image of Jesus sitting on my heart, dangling his legs. And we were talking, And she told us at that time that, you don't have to pray formulaically. Jesus is your friend. And these were very important spiritual concepts that I took in at that early age because of her. Thank you, Sister Jude. And then she says to us, so Jesus is your friend. What do you do with friends? You talk to them. You share your deepest feelings. You share your sorrows. You share your joys. And she says, there's a chapel next door. Now, we weren't allowed into the chapel in the convent of the nuns who taught us. That was verboten. But there was a convent right next to us. It was a convent of the Sisters, you're going to love this, of Perpetual Adoration. And they were from Mexico. It had been driven out because of the persecutions of the Catholic Church in Mexico. So they were there. They were an enclosed order, like St. Teresa of Avila. That meant, she traveled all over the place. She broke her own rules. But if you're in an enclosed order, you're there behind a grill, and you don't even see your family except through the grill. And that's a lifetime commitment. So there they were. I noticed that I really liked their habits. Their habits were red. The nuns that taught us had black habits with these kind of white wimples, and it was a little forbidding, but they overcame it. But their habits were red, and I knew about these nuns, and I would go into that chapel every now and then because they were Mexican of origin. There were some Americans in there, but they had this way of decorating that was over the top. Really. They could come in here and decorate our altars, but I'll tell you, there would be a lot more gold. And it was for a child, my mentality at that time was, wow, this is really beautiful. And look there's Jesus up there. And it wasn't Jesus on the cross only. It was Jesus, the infant of Prague. And going back to Joseph of Cupertino, the infant of Prague is a little statue of Jesus as a baby, but traditionally you dress the infant in all these beautiful clothes. My mother had an infant of Prague in our house. Gary's mom had an infant of Prague in his house. And so Joseph of Cupertino wasn't alone. So you used it as a doll to help bring alive the devotion that the mother feels for the child. And where was I going with that? So there was that. And then so the teacher, Sister Jude, tells us, she says, if Jesus is your friend, you don't want to ignore him. Friends need to be talked to. So when you leave school, on your way home, it's just next door. Even if you're going down the hill and not up the hill, you can go in for just a few minutes and talk to Jesus. Well, I took her seriously. 7-year-olds are very literal. And I just saluted, and when I went out, there was this boy in my class named Walter Venemeyer. And Walter Venemeyer took a liking to me, and he used to chase me all around. He was a nuisance in my 7-year-old mind. So Walter would chase me around, and I'd lose him, and then I would go into the chapel. And I would walk in, and I would say, "Hi, Jesus, I'm here. It's Helen." Only I would use my familial name, which was Honey. "It's Honey, Jesus." And I would sit in the pew, and there would be 2 nuns, because it was 24 hours of adoration in that, always 2 nuns in the back praying. And I would go into the pew, and I would talk to Jesus. Just tell him what's on my mind. It's been a good day. Or, "It hasn't been such a good day, Jesus. I missed a couple of things in that spelling test, for heaven's sakes. Where were you?" And, it was normal exchange of my day. And also, as I learned from Sister Jude, a time when I could share my deepest sorrows, my deepest worries, and my deepest hopes And there was no loss to that. Nobody would make fun. Nobody would want to add on to it or change it in any way. It was a conversation where I met with complete and total acceptance. And that was when I was 7 years old. Now, obviously, I didn't always have that 7-year-old mentality, but I was fortunate enough to have it long enough that those habits stay with me. And they're habits, that talking to God, that opening our hearts to God, that being completely revelatory with God, sharing everything with God is a very, very wonderful habit in a familiar way, not in the formal way, not in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, as we used to pray, but, dear Jesus, my friend, are you there? You know, sometimes I would go in there and I would think, are you really there? And the thing about the nuns of perpetual adoration is there because their goal in life, their commitment was to adoration of Jesus and of Christ. They had the exposition of the Holy Sacrament. Let me explain that for a minute. So we have the host, right? And the host comes out and you take it and Jesus is within you, and it's a very deep symbol to be taken seriously for those who are of that mind. And in certain times of the year, but for perpetuity in this convent, that host was exposed on the altar as a reminder that when you walked into that chapel, something special was happening. Jesus was there, and he was available. He was no longer hidden away in the tabernacle. Again, the 7-year-old mind takes everything literally, and I did, but to my gain. Because later on, when I was able to have more sophisticated thinking, I could take the principles behind that practice, which was totally sincere, and apply them in a way that was more mature. Because God is always with us. He's ever present. So if we open our hearts, as Joseph did, maybe we'll levitate, I doubt it, but if we open our hearts, he comes in. He's just waiting. When my daughter had her first Holy Communion, I got her a picture. And the picture, it was just a painting. You've probably seen it somewhere. The painting was of Jesus, and he has a light in one hand, a lantern, and there's a doorway, and it's closed. And he's knocking on the door. And I told her, I said, you're about to receive your first Holy Communion, and Jesus is knocking on your door, and your job is to let him in. And, I was so pleased that when I was there last, they have a new house and they've moved in. And you know how it is, you get rid of things when you move into a new house. But that picture is still on her dresser. And to me, and she practices as a Catholic, and to me, that represents something very, very precious in her life, and it gives me solace in my life. So we have to put out self-effort, and we have to put our hearts into it. But then there's one more element, and it's a little bit less easy to define, because when we do that, as Swami so often told us, when you, as a devotee, come to the fore with those two qualities in place and in a real practice in your life, then something else happens, and it's called intuition. So intuition is that knowing without knowing how you know. I remember one time when it was my birthday, New Year's Day, I was heading over towards Swami's up at the village. He was having a celebration, and I was really down because the children were gone. I was just a single woman, and there was no celebration. I was feeling rather lonely. And yet, it was gorgeous. I mean, the snow had fallen, the trees. I'm walking up from the village to Crystal Hermitage. I mean, you couldn't have asked. It was like a Christmas postcard. But still, down energy. And I get to the door, and there's Swami, and he's greeting people. And he's just saying, good morning, welcome, Happy New Year, And then I got there, and just before I'd gotten there, I had said what I know now was a little prayer. At the time, I thought it was a complaint. But I said to God, really, it would just be nice if someone were here to hold my hand. Because when you're a single parent, you're single. Emphasis on that word. And you are doing it all. And it's heavy. It's wonderful, and it's heavy. So I get to the door, and there's Swami, and he says, Happy New Year, Helen. And he reaches out, and he takes my hand, and he pulls me right to his side. And he doesn't say a word. He just keeps greeting people. Good morning, Happy New Year, Happy New Year. But he's holding my hand. And he held my hand until the last person came in. And then he said, let's go in. And we did. And I thought to myself, his intuition was so highly developed that he could tune into that slightest little unhappiness that I had, which I'm sure would soon have passed. But if he could do it, he did it. And he did do it. And so the intuition is so important to develop. Well, sometimes we have an intuition, we don't even know how we got it, and we act on it. And I think Swami did that. He may have known a lot more than I'm thinking. But in my case, I'll tell you a story that happened up at the meditation retreat. And we'll end with this. So I had a writing project, and I booked a cottage. And I go up there, and it's the middle of summer. And the middle of summer at Ananda is really, really hot. And there was no air conditioning. I don't know if there is now. But so I had my computer. By that time, I was pretty good at it. And the books and everything. And I spent the week there. I would work hard in the morning, cooler hours. And then in the afternoon, I would go in my car because that's where the air conditioning was. And I would just go all around through the forest and up and down the mountain hills. And then I would come back, and my custom was that just before dinner, things were beginning to cool off, I would take a hike, and I would go from my little cabin, maybe it's a mile, I don't know, all the way out to Bald Mountain. And some of you know Bald Mountain. It's this outcrop, which it's a huge rock. If you climb on the top of the rock, you have this spectacular view. On one side, there's the array of the Sierra Nevadas and all the forests leading up to them. And then on the other side, you look down into the valley, and you know that at the bottom is the Yuba River, and sometimes you can hear it. So I would go there, and I would meditate a little bit and just be there and appreciate the vastness of it, the spirituality of it, the aloneness without being lonely of it. It was beautiful. So I thought, maybe I won't go today. This is my last day. The car was filled. All my things were ready to go, almost. And then I had the thought, no, I should go. When am I going to be able to do this again? So I thought, okay, I'm going to go. Even though it's a little hot and it's a little early for me to go, I'm going to go. And I grabbed a bottle of water and went out the door and was up on the path ready to trek out when I had the thought, I might need that bigger water bottle. And I thought, no, you're just going to go and come back. You're not even going to meditate. I thought, no, I should go back and get the big water bottle. So I went back and I got the big water bottle. And then I made the trek out. And I go down the forest path and across where the manzanitas all are and up the little rise. And I come out at the rock. And I'm just about to climb on the top of the rock when all of a sudden I hear this huge thrashing about in the bush right there next to me. And I was startled and I was afraid. And I thought to myself, what could it be? A mountain lion? No. A bear? At this time of day? No. And all of a sudden, with that thought, out came this man. And, He wasn't tall or anything, but he was certainly unexpected and frightening like anything. And all of a sudden, I realized I knew him. It was Narada. And Narada was this wonderful devotee. He used to take us, when Gary and I would take the kids up to the meditation retreat on a field trip, he would take us out into these places we never knew about for hikes and down to the Yuba River, for vision quests, things like that. He was wonderful. But this wasn't the Narada that I knew. He says to me, after scaring the daylights out of me, he says, "Give me that water." And he reached over and he grabbed the water bottle and he took the top off and he poured it over his head. And I'm thinking to myself, Lord, he's rude. And then half of it was gone. The other half he just gulped down. And with that, and I'm watching this, not understanding how to put it together. And with that, he staggered over to the base of the rock and fell down. Just like that. At that point, I had the presence of mind to say, "Narada, what's wrong?" And he said, "Helen, you're not going to believe this." And so he told me his story. So Narada was scheduled to teach or to give a men's meditation group a retreat the next day. And he had the bright idea of starting off the retreat in the morning down at the base of the mountain at the Yuba River. And he thought, we'll meditate by the river, we'll have breakfast there, we'll go swimming, it's just going to be wonderful. And he had it all set up in his mind. Then he had the thought, I wonder, why don't we just walk up the hill? I don't think he thought of it as a mountain. Walk up the hill to Bald Mountain, and we could end the day with sunset and meditation up there. It sounded like a great idea. But he thought to himself, I better make sure, make a path up, because it's pretty overgrown. So he started out. Well, he was wrong. It was more than a path. It was more than a hill. It was a mountain, and it was all overgrown with manzanita, so he got lost. And he had no water, ran out of that very soon, and he had one apple. And that was it. And he began to just go any which way in kind of a panic, losing his way almost completely. But he didn't lose the deeper way. He began to sing to Divine Mother. And he sang all the Divine Mother songs that he knew. And it was a call for help. And that's how he found his way right up to the rock. And he said, Helen, it's a miracle. He said, Helen, you're a miracle, which was overstating it quite a bit. But he meant that all that confluence was a miracle. And when I thought about it, I realized what had happened. You put together a man who is deeply spiritual and who knows enough to call out to Divine Mother in his moment of crisis. And then you put together a woman who has spent a whole week in the atmosphere of the meditation retreat, who has gone inside, who has been thinking really only of God as he manifests through Education for Life. And then you get the perfect environment for intuition to kick in. Mindless intuition, mind you. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was so open at that time that the Divine Mother could plant that seed. Go get the bigger bottle of water. And so I did, without questioning. And I got to be part of something that was actually very special. You should have seen us. After he got his strength back, we started back. Now, he was so weak that I had to hold him up. But the two of us, we looked like Laurel and Hardy. We're going down the forest road, and we're staggering because he couldn't keep a straight line. And we're going this way and that way. But the whole time, we're celebrating and thanking Divine Mother for this wonderful opportunity to bring together the three elements in our reading this morning. That element of putting out the energy, the element of being receptive to whatever is going to happen, and then finally, being intuitive. It is the intuition that will get us where we want to go.